Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Wednesday, August the 7th in the beautiful Memorial Arena in Victoria. I want to thank our volunteer crew and Shaw staff who make it all possible. Our guest in this segment is Chris Cook. Chris is the host of an excellent radio show called Guerrilla Radio on CFUV Radio, and also, I guess you're the publisher of PacificFreePress.com, which is an online
news aggregator, I guess, for the better part.
Yeah.
And Guerrilla Radio blog.blogspot.ca.
Now
which
you're
is getting
beyond
more.
me.
That's getting more traffic these days than my Pacific Free Press site, sadly enough.
Give the address again.
That's Guerrilla Radio blog.blogspot.ca.
And Gorilla is G-O-R-I.
That's Gorilla, the monkey in the woods, not the guy with the guns.
Okay. So, Chris, you wanted to start off talking about, this is August the 7th, so it's the anniversary of really a terrible event in human history.
Well, yeah, Jack. I mean, yesterday, August 6th, in Japan, more than 50,000 people in Hiroshima gathered at their Peace Park to commemorate, and that's right at sort of the ground zero of the first American bomb that fell on Japan 68 years ago, believe it or not. And it got some reports, and maybe I'll get to that a little bit, AP report especially. But today is August 7th as we're taping this, and it occurred to me that August 7th and August 8th are days that aren't commemorated by anybody, but they're really the most important, because on August 9th, the second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. I'm sure most people are aware of that. But on August the 7th and on August the 8th, Harry Truman, the President of the United States, had the opportunity to stop. He had the opportunity not to drop a second bomb. But, of course, he didn't. He allowed that second bomb to be dropped, knowing full well that it would kill, scores of thousands of people, as it did. And who knows how many more died in the subsequent years from illness and cancer and everything else. Remember, Jack, that what happens after a nuclear explosion in those days was largely unknown. They didn't realize, they didn't know even what radiation sickness was. At least they didn't have a clear handle on that. And when the Americans found out, they tried to cover it up. Just as they covered up the fact that there was no need to drop the Hiroshima bomb or the Nagasaki bomb in the first place. What we always hear is that those bombs, yes, it was a terrible thing to do, but it was necessary. It was a necessary evil to stop the war and to save American lives. Well, both of those claims are untrue. The Japanese had been ready and practically begging to surrender to the United States for weeks and weeks prior to the dropping of those bombs. They had only one condition, that the emperor wouldn't be humiliated or arrested or hung, as a lot of people in the States wanted. It would be like if the Germans won the war, they hung the king instead of Winston Churchill. The emperor was a figurehead, in Japan, as they are today, and as Queen Elizabeth is in Britain. They're a titular head of state, but they're not controlling the state. They're not political leaders at all. Well, neither is the Emperor of Japan, but he's a very important figure, obviously, to the Japanese. The Americans wouldn't have it. No conditions whatsoever. That was their firm line. But really, and Howard Zinn talks about this in his book, You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train, the great American historian. He talks, and he's got the documentation to prove that the Japanese were falling over themselves.
To surrender.
Yes, with one small caveat. The irony is, of course, Jack, that after they surrendered with no conditions, the General MacArthur, who went in and became the proconsul of post-war Japan, he accepted that condition, and the emperor was left unmolested. But it could have been done from the beginning. But why? Why was it done? Well, those bombs weren't really dropped on Japan. They were dropped on Russia, and especially the Nagasaki bomb, because this was to show Russia what the new world was going to look like, and America hoped that this would be the new world order that they seem to be much closer today to attaining, a single superpower ruled world. But of course the Russians quickly got the bomb themselves, which set the stage for the Cold War after.
So 1945, I agree, by the way, that those bombs were dropped on basically defenseless people to be an object lesson to Russia.
Yeah.
because Russia was the other great power in 1945, a huge military power. And the United States wanted to show them who was number one, and so they dropped 2 atomic bombs on those people. The president before Truman,
Roosevelt.
I think had a much more conciliatory approach to Russia. I think under Roosevelt, the 2 countries could have gotten along. But under Truman, obviously, it was the next step. So that became the next war, almost without a break. We went from the World War II into the Cold War, which was fought in some hot places as well. And that lasted until the late 1980s.
Well, if you think it stopped, you know.
Then we had terrorism, right? Something else that is totally unnecessary, but it's been an unbroken stretch for decades now. Always war, war, war. And who is behind this and who benefits from it? And why aren't we ever told the truth? Like, for example, that the Bush family was funding Hitler. If you Google Bush and Hitler and Guardian, the British newspaper, you'll see the story about how the Bush family owned a bank, Prescott Bush, senator and banker, and they were funneling money to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis in the early years, in the late 20s and the early 30s. And anybody who's ever been part of a group knows what you need to get going is money. And that's what the Bush family was providing to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. How was that kept secret?
Well, and it wasn't just Prescott Bush. You know, there was a lot of American corporations that profited handsomely. Coca-Cola was in Germany. Ford Motor Company was in Germany. There was lots of big corporations there. And the Ford Motor Company, if memory serves, they sued for damages to one of their plants in Germany that was bombed during the war by the Americans, and they had the chutzpah to sue the Americans for damaging their property.
And did they win?
I can't, probably, but I can't remember. But well, the thing with Truman, of course, Jack. I mean, Truman was a sort of a president by default because Roosevelt died in office, and so Truman got in. Truman is noted too for creating the CIA and what became the shadow government, and we see it today more obviously. That, you know, President Obama, who is also a creature of the intelligence agencies, they have been running the show at least since the Truman period. The only president I think that stood up against them in office was President John Kennedy, and we sort of know what happened to him, you know. But ever since, basically, that was the end of American democracy, and Nagasaki really is a departure point, where it is the departure point where America isn't going to be run by true democracy anymore, and that runs, you know, continuously till today.
I would have to agree. Maybe you can just say a bit more about what you just said about Barack Obama, who was also a creature of the intelligence.
Barack Obama, you know, we know a little bit about his biography. Very little, really, considering, you know, his position. It's kind of amazing. He's got both of his parents are dead. He's an orphan. His father died when he was quite young, and he wrote a book about his relationship with his father. His father was African and left his mother, and he was raised by his mother and his maternal grandparents. But his mother worked for the Ford Foundation, which is a very well-known front for the CIA and other intelligence agencies rather. He grew up abroad, Indonesia most notably. So he was, I suspect, rather groomed from a very early age to walk in sideways into this parallel ruling order, which I believe still holds the reins. I mean, if you look at, say, the 1960s with John F. Kennedy's assassination first, and then his brother Robert, and also Martin Luther King Jr., and Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ for that matter, right? If there's a common thread between those men, and that thread is the Vietnam War and their opposition to the American war-making machine that was the new America. Kennedy was rumored to be considering bringing an end to the Indochina involvement of the United States. He died, of course. His brother was suspected of following that suit. King made a great speech, an anti-war speech that was decried even by Democrats at the time, and then he was killed a year after that speech. And Lyndon Johnson is the only president in American history to walk away from the presidency, not like Nixon, who was booted out. and that was also to do with Vietnam. But Johnson refused to run for a second term. Can you imagine a president today doing that, or at any time? He's the only president ever just to walk away and say, no, I'm not going to accept my party's nomination for the presidency. And that was because of his opposition to Vietnam.
Johnson was opposed to Vietnam?
He was when he left. And he went into this bizarre seclusion after leaving politics, growing his hair hippie style and living on his farm in Texas and becoming, sort of quite an eccentric, certainly in
I've
political
never heard
terms.
this before.
Yeah, well,
amazing.
He walked away. He couldn't take it. And I guess he didn't want to end up like his predecessor.
Well, I mean, I saw the movie JFK, and I remember it's so obvious when you see that movie that Kennedy was killed by the secret government of the United States, with the front of the intelligence networks that are so powerful now and only getting more powerful.
Well, there's a great website out of the States. It's called whowhatwhy.com. Russ Baker is a guy, I've had him on my show on Guerrilla Radio in the past. It's a terrific site. But they've got something featured there, a little video clip of the day Kennedy was assassinated. Now, it's not him driving through Dealey Plaza, like, everybody's seen that edited version. But it's just before that. So JFK's car, the convertible, like whose idea was that, is sitting there, and Jackie and Jack are sitting there, and Governor Connolly's in the front seat. And there's a standing position for two Secret Service agents on the bumper. And one of the agents is going to stand, take up his position, and there's handholds and everything else, and he'd be right behind JFK, obviously blocking a shot from behind. His boss, you see, walk into the frame and wave him away. And he stands there like this, saying, what are you talking about? That's my job. That's where I'm supposed to be. No, and he waves him away. And you can see that this security guy is really put out and dumbfounded, and he's like, PO'd. He's like, what? But he's shooed away, and the other guy from the other side is shooed away as well. And so that car went on to Dealey Plaza with the Secret Service guys that should have been standing on that back bumper. Not there.
I've seen that too. It all happens in 2 seconds. You just see the supervisor go up to them, wave them away.
Wave them off.
They both get off, and it's never been given. And the prominence. If that kind of stuff was shown on the national news here in Canada and in the United States, people would immediately know that something was very, very wrong. It's exactly like what happens with 9/11. The media's job, obviously, is to never allow a question to be asked about any of it, the official story, which shows the total, betrayal by the ownership of the media. Everybody who's working there, they got to do it. They know what they got to do to keep working there. But
well, I mentioned the AP piece, and this is a case in point.
So we're moving now to
before that, but this is on Hiroshima,
right? It's the same story, yes.
So the AP, the Associated Press, they put up a few paragraphs here. Japan marks the 68th anniversary of Hiroshima bomb, but in these few paragraphs, there's no mention of the United States, not a single one. There's no mention. They do mention Fukushima, but they don't mention. Well, I guess for lack of space here, that it was America that forced nuclear power onto a defeated Japan after the war. And of course, they're all GE plants, right? But do you think that the Japanese, after having been nuked twice during the war, were really, enthusiastic about starting up a nuclear power program? No, they weren't, and they still aren't. But, the loser doesn't get to call the tune, and that's the way of it here. And they downplay the numbers. And tens of thousands were killed. Well, we know that's a pretty low estimate, and it's a pretty rough estimate. Could this reporter not, as you say, do a little search on the internet to get a more accurate idea of? I think it's closer to 200,000 people were killed in those two bombings, and the subsequent sicknesses that they suffered. But this is the way they don't lie necessarily, but they don't tell you the truth either. And they let these things go by. No mention of where did these bombs come from? Well, if I didn't know, if I was a young guy, 12 years old, and reading this, oh gee, this nuclear thing, I wouldn't know that the United States dropped those bombs and dropped them, because, and let alone because, dropped them for a false reason,
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there you go, the press, they're not necessarily our friend, that's for sure.
No, the press is definitely not our friend, the media. So let's move on to Fukushima.
Well,
which
yeah,
is
now
where
the
we are
Fukushima,
now.
2.5 years later almost, it was in March of 2011 that there was that massive earthquake. Everybody knows the story, that the spectacular tsunamis that we saw on television in real time. And then the subsequent destruction of the Daiichi plant, the Fukushima Daiichi complex. There's 6 nuclear reactors there. Some people probably still don't even know that. 3 of those reactors immediately went into meltdown. They didn't use that word for months and months and months. But even more surprising is they're still melting down, Jack.
I know, they're totally out of control.
But, is this on the news? I heard your previous segment, you were talking about A-Rod, the baseballer, who's having so much trouble now, and the mountains of press that he's getting, the millions of words, the gallons, the thousands of gallons of ink being spilled about this guy. We know everything about him, Well, at least people that follow this kind of thing do. But how many people are really aware that Fukushima is an ongoing thing, and especially here in the Pacific? And
it's getting worse.
It's not getting better, that's for sure.
This morning, there was just very early. There was some news about Fukushima on CFAX, and they said that it's getting out of control, and water, hundreds of tons of nuclear contaminated water are leaking into the Pacific Ocean.
Where else is it going to go?
Yeah, and at the end of the story, but there's no threat to human health. That was how they kind of.
Well, there's tens of thousands of people have been evacuated from the surrounding area, and it's
just the lie. There's no threat to human health or no risk to human health. I don't remember the word.
Well, I saw a piece saying that many of the workers now that were trying to fix up Fukushima, and they're into unknown territory here. They've got leukemia-like levels of radiation exposure.
I mean, Fukushima is so bad I don't even like to think about it. But our Prime Minister Harper is going around the world trying to sign new nuclear deals. We've got to shut this industry down completely.
Uranium. And Canada, it should be remembered, I was reminded just today, that Canada played a role in providing the uranium for the bombs dropped on both Nagasaki and on Hiroshima. And we continue to play an active role proliferating nuclear technology and materials in the world.
Call your politician and call your media and tell them this is no good. I mean, they don't care if you call them, but we've got to do something. Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum, and thank you, Chris Cook.
Thanks, Jack.
Welcome to segment 3 of Citizens Forum. It's August the 7th, Wednesday.